Alright, what's going on, guys? With Elden Ring DLC having been out for well over a month now, it's starting to feel like the veil of mysteries has been pulled off. We've pretty thoroughly grasped all the new gameplay details, and many people's minds have switched to unraveling the lore and the meaning behind what we played. But despite that, there are still a ton of details in this DLC that I guarantee you did not know. So today we are back at it, going through 8 new discoveries, and you know how these go. If I show you something today that you didn't already know, then be sure to let me know by leaving a like on the video and subscribing if you're new around here. But with all that, let's get into the first one. One of the most formidable new enemy types in Elden Ring's DLC are the furnace golems, which serve more as environmental factors than actual mini boss fights. And they can be a real pain to bring down, having to sit there and chip away at their legs for a long time. And although there are creative ways to break their balance, chances are you chose not to deal with these guys. And even if you did, there is a very interesting detail that you probably missed about them. Now, when you take a look at these furnace golems, they have a little mask on their basket that is said to depict the fell god. And if you get the chance to look at this face, you will see it's expressionless with closed eyes and a closed mouth. But did you know that this isn't just a mask, but the face is alive? If you pay close attention, when you finally bring them down, you'll notice that the face has changed. You can see when they're unharmed, the face is very stoic, but after their posture breaks, the eyes are open and the mouth is agape, and if you have a very keen eye, you can see the change happen in real time. As soon as the posture gets broken, the expression will change. Bonfire VN has a great showcase of these expressions on their channel, where you can see this change without actually having to be in the middle of combat. It's very creepy, but I think it gives them that perfect level of unsettling charm to be scary even without their destructive power. It's very on brand for FromSoftware. When I saw Radahn as the final boss of the DLC, I got a big sense of deja vu. And for the obvious reason that we had already fought Radahn before, which obviously would be a cause, but there was something more there. You may have recognized a lot of the moveset from the fight in the base game, but if you're an OG of FromSoftware games, there's a chance you might have recognized that we got a taste of this all the way back in Dark Souls 2. And that's because people noticed that much of Radahn's moveset comes from Vengarl in Dark Souls 2. Now you can very easily notice that Vengarl's body uses the same kind of weapon as Radahn. So FromSoftware had a very good blueprint here to reuse some of these combos, and you'll notice throughout the fight that many of them do overlap. There's that signature double slash move followed by the cross that you'll see at the end even catches the player from a bit of range, just like it does in the final boss fight of the DLC. And if you think the Radahn fight is jank, well, you may have Dark Souls 2 hitboxes to blame. Now, of course, the combos aren't exactly one-to-one, and Radahn does of course have a much more expansive moveset than Vengarl, but the ideas are there, and I do think it's fair to say that they probably used Vengarl as the framework. He honestly might have been even more of a basis for Radahn than just the moves, being this berserker lion warrior of Ferosa. And just like Radahn lost his mind to the Scarlet Rot and his body kept fighting on, Vengarl's body kept fighting on due to its warrior spirit, even after his head was cut off. So the more I think about it, it's a perfect overlap, and I think FromSoftware absolutely used Vengarl in their inspiration for Radahn. An interesting mechanic in Elden Ring's base game that a lot of people didn't know about were feints, an alternate attack that becomes available when you press the dodge button while charging a heavy attack. As seen on the scimitar here, instead of doing the double slash, the feint does a quick slash and then a backflip. Feint attacks were available on 3 types of weapons, those being curved swords, thrusting swords, and heavy thrusting swords. Now, while this move isn't super useful in PvE, it allows for some very interesting situations to happen in PvP, with being able to trick your opponent, since a feint begins as the telegraph for a heavy charge attack. But did you know that with the DLC, they introduced a new type of weapon that also has feints, those being the great katanas. You can see that the feint here changes the heavy jab into a backstep with a slash. Even the regular great katanas get its slashes changed to the backstep one. Now, I've literally been using the great katanas exclusively since the DLC dropped, and I had no idea they had feints. Now, you guys have heard me go off about how good Rakshasa's katana is and how it's my favorite weapon. Well, now it's even better. So I am very happy to learn this, and I'm curious how many of you knew about this as well. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty mad at myself for not knowing about this. One part of the Shadowkeep that I always found very interesting was the bridge where we can find these basins with this golden fire burning upwards. And I wondered what the significance of this was, but I never took a really close look at these. Not until it was pointed out to me that these aren't basins at all. They're boats. More specifically, they're the boats of the Tibia mariners, the ghostly sailors that guide those lost in death to the afterlife. And it's obvious now looking at them, they are exactly the same, just missing the inner contents. But what's the takeaway here? What is the lore significance of this? Well, we can find in many spots throughout the Land of Shadow remnants of the old death traditions, where the dead were once burned in ghost flame under the worship of the twin bird. And we learn about this concept of the Helphen, a black church where those who died in battle would seek out in order to pass on. And oddly enough, the church district of the Shadowkeep sure looks like it could fit this description. We can look at the depiction of the church on the Helphen steeple and find this same three-window motif. But what does this actually mean? Personally, the interpretation I've picked up on is that after Marika's conquest, these ways of the old world were repurposed under her design. I don't think this is literally the Helphen, perhaps another depiction just the way the Helphen steeple is, but whatever purpose these boats or location used to serve has now been fashioned under the Order of Gold, which is likely what we see with the golden grace coming out of the ashes. As for their exact purpose or mechanics, what do you think these boats are doing now, in the state we find them in the current game? Rellana's lore in the DLC tells us that she was once a Carian princess, the sister of Rennala, and an heir to the Carian throne, but she forsook that birthright in order to follow Messmer, leaving to aid him in his subjugation of the Land of Shadow. And we see this dichotomy visualized in her use of magic and flame, combining the two elements in her weapons. But despite her devotion, we don't really see much reciprocation from Messmer, at least in a direct format. But did you ever take a close look at her weapons? And I mean a really close look, because when her remembrance describes her as the sword of Messmer, that may be very literal. If you look at the guard of the fire sword that she wields, you'll notice a decoration of a two-headed snake. It's almost impossible to see without camera tools, but right there on the hilt, it's very apparent. So is this sword the one symbol of respect from Messmer to Rellana? I think it very well could be, perhaps given to her when she took on the role of the sword of Messmer. So that's a very cool detail that is normally never going to be seen, but it just shows you the level of storytelling that FromSoftware goes to. So for all you guys that play through Elden Ring in co-op, let me ask you something. When you played the DLC and got to the final boss, did this happen to you? So that is not a joke. That is not a mod, that is not a cheat. If you summon two cooperators for the fight against Leda and her allies and they live, then when you continue through the area and go up the steps towards the Divine Gate, Radahn will literally just die. I have absolutely no idea why this works or how it works, but several of you guys reached out to me and said that it happened to you as well, and as far as the patch notes go, this has not been addressed. Now obviously this is a glitch, not supposed to happen whatsoever, but I like to think that Radahn is just scared of gank squads, and as an invader I get it, there is nothing worse. But regardless, I hope this does eventually get patched, because it does rob you out of the experience, even if that experience is pretty brutal. Every now and then when Elden Ring gets patched, there are a lot of changes that happen behind the scenes that aren't listed in the patch notes. And when patch 1.13 dropped, there were a ton, and we still haven't figured out the majority of changes that actually happened. But one of the ones that was quickly noticed was that they added a chair to Rellana's boss room, and we've talked about that before. However, there was another change recently that changes our understanding of a character quite a bit, that being the horn-sent Grandam. And the patch actually changed the description of the watchful spirit and and it actually only changed one word, to where before the patch, the spell referred to the Grandam as the Empyrean Grandam, but after the patch it just calls her the Horn-sent Grandam, just like her map marker. Now I actually do agree with this change. I thought the reference as the Empyrean Grandam was pretty weird. We have to do a bit of gymnastics to figure out why exactly that word Empyrean is used, but now it simplifies things, and it's not another wrench in the lore. But what do you think? Are you happy with this change? Or would you have liked for them to keep referencing her as Empyrean? The one thing that really caught my eye when I finally reached Empyrean at the end of Shadow of the Erdtree was all of the spiral imagery, with the very tower itself being a spiral, and that spiral being the path to divinity. But the shape, the color, and the overall aesthetic of the area made me think immediately of the Godslayer Greatsword, the chosen weapon of the gloam-eyed queen who led the Godskin hunt. And the similarities here really can't be denied. I mean, it looks like it was ripped straight out of Empyrean with all of the same motifs, and the only thing we have to ask is why? Well, one interesting theory that I've considered even before the DLC came out was that this was the site of the Godskin hunt. And that's because of the story trailer. Because in that trailer, it depicts the Gate of Divinity as full of these freshly skinned corpses. And not to mention that the Godskin hunt as a whole is an event entirely erased from history. There's no record of it in the lands between, and if it took place in the Land of Shadow, then that would make a lot of sense. And not to mention the obvious nod in the story trailer where we see that gloaming purple sky off to the left. I think the hints here are pretty clear. But of course that would mean that the gloam-eyed queen was working with Marika in her conquest, and the gods that were killed were the horn-sent tower folk. Now the problem is that there is nothing in the DLC that even remotely hints at this, or touches on the gloam-eyed queen, or the Godskin hunt in any capacity. The reality is the only Godskins we find are in the lands between. So maybe this is all circumstantial evidence, but I think all the similarities between the Godslayer Greatsword and Empyrean are a bit too close to be coincidence. So I'd like you guys to leave your thoughts down in the comments below. Why do you think the similarities are so strong here? Or do you think it's just a result of Elden Ring symbolism and not meant to be taken so deep? But those are 8 new things that you probably didn't know about Elden Ring DLC. I hope I showed you something new today. It was a pretty lore heavy video. Like I said at the beginning, there's only so much to find on the gameplay side, and I've reached the end of my list in that regard. So if you guys have something obscure that hasn't been talked about, definitely leave that in the comments below, and I'll include it in future videos. But for today, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here. I'm going to try to keep these Discoveries videos coming as long as possible, but with all that, I will catch you in the next one.